Welcome to Success Authorities Conversation Street with Leadership Authority Peter Beaumont and with Business Culture Authority Ronn Lehmann and me, Linda Ruhland, Success Authorities founder.
In high school, my nickname was Perce or Percy. And so when you abbreviate Percival Enterprises, it becomes percent. So the percent sign is my logo. And my tagline is a small percent adjustment can produce dramatic results. My history is I was a teacher for years. I thought there was always more to life than a classroom. A friend of mine said, well, have you ever thought about assessments? And having been a special ed teacher, I couldn't even start a classroom program without first assessing the student's strengths. And that is a key thing throughout my entire career. Do we have the right data, right information? So then I became an independent contractor so I could find the individual tools that would best provide to my clients what they needed, what information they needed. So I've been self-employed for 39 years and been doing that.
So who do you work with, Jeff, mostly? What sort of clients? What's the sweet spot for you?
Well, I spent 40 years in Milwaukee and worked with small to medium-sized companies, manufacturing firms, very successful in manufacturing firms. I have a number of franchise organizations. Batteries Plus is one of my long-term clients, even though it was probably the longest sales cycle.
Jeff, what kind of assessments are your clients interested in? What are they using? How are they using them?
Most of them are using them for pre-employment, but after I look for tools which have the capability of providing them information for pre-employment, but also on the backside, being able to use it as a management tool, a team development tool, problem-solving tool. So I look for the tools that can give me the best information. I use normative assessment tools because I want to also have, distortion scales built in. I want to be sure that we're using the same metrics for measuring across the board and can provide them most accurate information on their people. So once we get them sold on pre-employment, then I can go work on the backside and say, now, are you using this for developing your teams? Well, how do I do that? Okay. Are you using it for conflict resolution? Well, how do I do that? So then my teacher hat comes back on.
Yeah. Do they, how about for promotions, or if you're looking at 3 internal candidates to move into one position? Is that another use that they find?
Oh, absolutely. So we're able to use the information. And again, I use tools where they don't necessarily have to go back and reassess them. The tool is so accurate. Tools are so accurate that it'll give you the information they need for making that decision. Are they able to, will they do the job? Are they wired to do the job? Will they fit the team and will they fit their supervisor? So we want to be able to gather that information because, the old Peter principle, people are promoted to their highest level of incompetence.
Thank you.
Yes, and sometimes past it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I resemble that, Mark.
No last names, Peter. No last names. How about for, and I guess connected with that, do they use them for performance improvement as well? So if I've got a performance improvement plan that I'm working on, are assessments part of the data that I use to here's where I need to improve?
When I'm developing a professional development plan, we work from the individual's assessment and say, all right, what do we need for this job? Will they fit that piece? If they don't, what do we need to help them grow so they can fit it? Again, it goes back to my principle of a small percent adjustment can produce dramatic results. Mm-hmm. And with professional development plans, typically working on one goal, one item at a time, instead of multiple.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we want people to be able, when we're looking at succession planning, I say it starts not just at the top, but it also starts at the bottom. When you bring someone in from a broom pusher position, how far can that person grow to their competence? And if we need to, we can also develop those competence.
And I guess as I hear you talk about that, my assumption would be that if I owned a business and brought you in, I need to be pretty clear on what I want to measure.
Yes.
Or if I'm thinking, well, what am I looking for in a leader? I better have an answer for that. Or do you help them discover that? Or both?
Or both. Well, I'm working with a group here in North Carolina right now, and they wanted to put together this leadership. Well, it's a group of consultants who specialize in leadership. And I asked them a question. I said, well, what are the three critical pieces for leadership? And from 6 people, we ended up with 19 different answers. No one answered it the same.
And you say they were consultants.
And they were consultants, yes.
FYI, Ron has written a book on consultants. He might want to share that with you.
Great.
Yeah, it's the dark side.
Consultant Confidential, isn't that right?
Yes, Consulting Confidential. Available wherever fine books are sold, as long as it's Amazon. But yeah, I mean that's a great illustration, though, of I think something we talk about all the time is that, for there's 128,000 books on leadership and leadership consultants and things, and I guess I'm of two minds. On the one hand, they're all different. On the other hand, they're all the same. And I kind of ricochet between those 2 points. But how did you resolve their 19 best 3 practices?
I gave them the 19 responses back to everyone, and with the challenge, come up with 3. So they're still working on that.
I was going to say, are they on the clock while they're working on this? Because you could be waiting a while.
Not for me.
Oh, okay.
But I'd like to share with you another example of, I was working with a foundry, and 3 brothers owned it, and one was acting as CEO, one was acting as the plant manager, and one was acting as the HR director. They were having high turnover. And in foundry industry, that's a lot because it's a dirty, hot area. So they were looking at one particular position, and it was a supervisory position. And I said, well, let's complete this little survey. One of my assessment tools provides a job description survey, it's called. And I first had them fill it out independently. And as expected, when I received the answers back, they were all across the board. So being brothers, I closed the office door and I said, now figure out amongst yourselves what you want in that supervisor. And the expletives flew all over the place, and it was an interesting conversation. But for the first time, they were thinking the same way. That's the most important thing, is to get their thoughts as to what their expectations are for that job. And that happens so many times where it's not accepted across the board as to what they're looking for.
And did you find that before that meeting, each one believed that everybody else was in agreement with theirs? Or they just assumed that my point of view is the same as others, or were they aware that there were differences?
I honestly believe that they were somewhat aware of it because they were brothers. They'd lived together for a long time.
Yeah.
But one would hire from one set of expectation, one would manage from another, and one would look for the results as a third.
That formula ends in equals turnover, right? Because I get hired for one thing, I get managed a different way.
That's right.
And and so they're confused, and especially if it's that kind of work. And this employment environment, it's probably pretty easy to be lured to anything else.
Exactly.
So, Jeff, how do you, I think this is, I've actually never spoken to anybody that actually specializes in this. I think it's really an interesting subject and something that should be used much more than it currently is by, I can think of several of my own clients. But so Ron asked about measuring. How do you measure the effectiveness of the tools within the client? What are the kind of things that you use to say, yep, this is working or it's not working?
Well, based upon performance and going back in doing a 6-month review. Well, first off, I try to train my clients that an orientation is not a 1-hour meeting. It wants to be ongoing. And then you want to use the data, because for both of my primary tools will identify cognitive abilities. And for that, that doesn't mean in how smart a person is, but how quickly do they process new information? Are they a quick study? Are they a slow study? So this is important for communication and for training.
Right.
So we can go back in after 6 months and say, let's look at the performance. Are they meeting your expectations? And then we go back in a year and we can say, all right, let's look, are they now meeting their expectations? Well, as a matter of fact, we're looking to promote them. I said, all right, let's take a look at the new job, because again, we don't want to promote to their highest level of incompetence.
Is there any way you could, and I'm just blue skying this, so I may be completely off, but I like data too. I'm process driven. That's what I do as a role with companies. I'm an integrator. So it would be wonderful if you could do it, but can you tie in these assessments with the performance reviews, or do you?
I ask them to use the information again as to what they're expecting, and let's look at it. Right. Because then we're able to say, well, how I call it pre-wired. How are you wired? Are they wired to be able to perform the job?
Right. So
I use a normative personality assessment with every 360. And I also, when I use the 360, I tell folks you should not attach money to a 360, to the results of a 360. A 360 is going to tell you, how am I being seen by everybody else, by my boss, by my peers, by my direct reports. But it doesn't explain why I'm being seen that way. So then we pull in the tool, the assessment tool, and say, now this is how you're wired, and I see light bulbs go on above people's heads. That's why I'm being seen this way, because this is my wiring directs my performance.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've got a client at the moment who's just done a 360 on a difficult employee, let's put it that way, and we're working through how best to address that. But they haven't addressed that, which is we're treating we're not treating the cause, we're treating the symptoms, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Okay. What I have found, without you saying that, which I think is really important, is that a lot of companies do 360s, but they do nothing about it afterwards.
Oh, I know. That's when I first started doing 360s, I said, well, now how did you, because I do my follow-up, how did you use it?
Right.
It's on the shelf.
Yeah.
It's in the bookcase.
So it's probably a leading question, but I'd be interested in your view. Why do you think that is? They just pay for doing it and then do nothing with it, right?
Because it means they're going to have to do some work on the back end.
You know what I think it is?
With every 360, I recommend a professional development plan.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So where all those reds are, it's like, okay, we need to build the greens, but we need to strengthen, do something about those reds. I think, at least here in this state, the problem is people don't like conflict. So they don't like to address it because it's a too difficult subject. That's my personal view. I think it's a bit of what you said, but I also think it's a bit of that too.
Yeah. I would concur, because I think most supervisors who are in charge of that they're given that responsibility, try to stay away from conflict.
Yes,
as much as you can.
Yeah,
completely.
I think there's a broader.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, workshop when I'm talking about assessments and looking at growth within the company. And I talk about supervisors, and I say supervisors are the curse or the cure.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And typically, at least in my experience, they have the least amount of development or training, or it's like, I'm the best carpenter, so now I'm going to be the supervisor.
Oh,
And
yes.
and that's they over and over again, what they talk about is, I was totally unprepared for the amount of people problems that were going to be consuming my day. I thought it was going to be about the job. It wasn't. It's about the people. And every day and throughout the shift, there's different shifts. I think that's, so they're unprepared.
Oh,
And
that's
you're
right,
right.
Ron, because
They're at the shovel, the end of the shovel.
their
And
success came from their performance.
Mhm.
And many times they're not even sure how they were able to do what they do.
Yeah.
And then they're promoted, and then their responsibility is to get the same performance out of the other people.
Yeah, and I think they fall back on, like we all do, we run home to the comfort zone and say, well, do it exactly the way I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to work. Maybe 25% of the people will accept that.
If they're
And
wired that way, right?
and you constantly hear, at least in the construction industry, telling supervisors, get out of the ditch. Get out of the ditch. You're leading the team. You're not doing the work anymore. But they're not sure what that means often.
Well, one of the things about people who become supervisors many times have growing families. And again, I address this in some of the workshops that I do. So what do teenage kids do? They eat more and they grow out of their clothes. So then, the parents need more money. So they go into HR and they say, how can I get some more money? Well, you can become a supervisor.
Yeah.
And that's where it can either be that curse or cure, because of the fact that either they are capable of being supervisors or they're capable of training. And in one particular case, we talked this person who wanted to become a supervisor into becoming an individual trainer for the company. It was a CNC operator that could make the machine sing. And so who did he work well with? He didn't work well with people. He worked with the machine well.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's doing now is we're only bringing in one additional person at a time. So all of a sudden, that skill that he brought to the machine, he's now transferring to the people that he's training, so that the other production is going up instead of typically going down.
Yeah. I did a workshop a few years ago for some very skilled technical electrical engineers who were now tasked with teaching the customers how to use the equipment. And I think they enjoyed learning the difference between lecturing and facilitating and teaching. But it was really interesting. They were very uncomfortable at first, but they really sort of got into it when they figured out it wasn't that different. They just had to sort of put on a different hat. And also I have a very good friend who went through exactly what you were talking about. His family was increasing. He was a salesperson, making, a lot of money, but he wanted some more stability. So they made him, the opening came for the sales manager, and he thought, well, then I'm not going to be on the road and this will be great. And he lasted about a year, and he went back to selling because he didn't like conflict. He didn't, his job was to make everybody happy, and that wasn't working. So he ended up going back, and I've met a lot of people like that. They get into it for the promotion and the money, and whatever, but they don't like what comes with it. And I'm not, you mentioned orientation not being an hour. I'm not sure we spend enough time orienting people on what it's going to mean to become a leader, especially at those frontline levels.
And providing the training.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a good thing, as opposed to the on-the-job method which they have now, and that's seems to be endemic all over in any industries. It's not, it's just, and I would imagine, and Jeff, you can match your experience to this if it does, that these days when it's really hard to find people, you do tend to, well, here's somebody and we'll put them in a job and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And so maybe we'll do the assessment, but we're looking for reassurance that this isn't a total washout, but that's the challenge.
Well, I train my clients to hire slow but fire fast.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we need somebody, right? Okay, well, let's think about this. What is it that you need? So they're making more knowledgeable decisions rather than just jumping.
Yeah. I'm sure that's challenging for them in this climate. The need to get people or replace people quickly, as opposed to, taking a more thoughtful approach and getting people that are actually A, going to work out, and B, stick around. Because
Well,
otherwise you're constantly hiring.
oh, and indeed. And it's fun. Back in 20 years ago, I was selling based upon turnover and turnover costs. And one of my favorite, clients initially said, well, the ad costs about $400, not looking at the internal costs.
Yeah, that's
for hiring and then losing people.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find that, do you have clients or, in the worlds that you inhabit, are companies kind of hedging a little bit on what they will, well, let me put it a different way. They're sort of loosening their standards.
Yeah,
in
they're
order to
saying
get
we need
people.
That's it. Whereas, I'm saying, well, what kind of people?
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Conversation Street. For more information or to schedule a private conversation with Success Authorities, email us at inquire@successauthorities.com.